we are going to go ahead and get started because you know Zoom will cut you off at that certain time frame. So we're just gonna go right ahead and get started. Thank you so much for agreeing to be with us this evening and share your insight on all things about truth telling, more specifically radical truth telling, and allowing yourself space and grace. So thank you, Pastor Carol, for being here with us tonight. And I just want to define radical honesty or radical truth telling for our viewers, just in case they're not aware of the term. So the definition of radical honesty or truth telling is a living, walking, talking out loud meditation that moves you from reactivity to being a creator of your own life. What are your thoughts on that, Pastor Carol?
To be honest, it was my very first time hearing radical honesty and it actually having a definition. Of course, for me, I would have broke down what radical is. I would have broke down what being honest is. I would have looked at the two that way. And that's kind of the way I was looking at it. Like I was looking at the fact that radical really, to me, speaks really of a generation. It speaks of a movement. It speaks of a truth that is presented. That can bring forth a change. Like when you just said, let me find the definition again, is living, walking, talking out loud. You said a meditation that moves you from reactivity to being the creator. And I think that whenever you look at creating something, like in the form of create, I love the definition. Like I said, it was the first time hearing it. But whenever you begin to think about creating something, you have to have truth. You can't create anything in your life that's going to be, let me just say, I'm not going to say not worth anything, but successful, or it can cause succession, or can cause legacy, or can be great. If you're striving to be great, you got to be honest with yourself. There has to be truth, and that radical honesty, living, walking, talking out loud. The meditation part was the other piece that kind of stirred me because, you know, that's thinking on it. So it means you're intentional. It's not something that you just pop up with. And I think that the generation that we dealing with can tend on all different spectrums, from the baby boom. I still falling boomer because I'll be 56 this year. But when you look at all of you guys, you are the millennials and the generation Y, right? So you're most likely falling between the 25 and up to, what is it, 39,
like 35,
40, somewhere, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. So you guys are falling in that grouping, and your thought patterns and your ways. And if you study culture, if you study movement, if you study change and thought patterns and habits, you will see that from the baby boomers to the millennials to the Ys, and then the Zs. God bless my babies, that's my grandbabies, you know. So you've got a whole different spectrum of what has become in their world that allows that meditation that walks loud, that speaks loud, because you're constantly getting it this way. So how do you counter it with what the truth is what I'm thinking. I mean, I just asked you guys a question. I'm not supposed to be asking you questions. You're supposed to be asking me questions.
I love that.
Questions. We love that. We are here for that. And you made so many valid points that I don't know about you, Dorian, but I hadn't even considered half of the stuff that Pastor Carol just dropped on us.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, Pastor Carol, that I love that you said was how you talked about, you know, like our generation, and especially like dealing with society and kind of the societal norms that we have to, you know, accustom ourselves to, or feel like we have to fit into these boxes. But how do we do that if we're trying to live our full lives, our full selves that God intended us to be? And do you have advice from your generation on what that journey looks like? Because a lot of us, we're like, oh, well, you know, I'm 25, I've lived so much life, and I think I know everything, or I think, you know, or we feel like we've gone through a lot. But you have seen twice that, and you've had probably parts of your journey where you're like, you felt like you weren't living your full self. How did you get to the point where you realized you were living your radical truth?
So I think that you're never fully living just your radical. I think you're always evolving, always. And I think you guys, I think you sent me some questions, and like that last question is like the aha, but I'm not going to go ahead and go all the way to the aha. But that radical truth, you discover it by trial and error. You discover it by owning your truth when you mess up, which generationally, our culture sometimes tends to pass blame. Our men, our women, you know, it's bigger than probably what we could spend a lot of time talking about it. But I think that, you know, along with mess ups, own it, being able to look at it. And as you grow up, you also understand that there is a truth that is out there, you know. And as me as a pastor, I believe that, you know, God, he already is leading us. He's guiding us. He's showing us things. Our life, just in a nutshell, has always been processed to get us to purpose, so to speak. So it's like knowing that ahead of time. If you can put that in our babies, if you can instill in them that you have purpose, that things that have gone on, you know, sometimes the trauma and the abuse and the disappointments and the heartaches and all of the things that sometimes make you feel like I just can't even make it another day. These are things that are shaping you to eventually allow you to fulfill a purpose that is sometimes far beyond you, but you just got to go on for ride. And so I think that knowing your truth is a little bit about, is definitely that trial and error and going along with the process and having people ahead of you that can tell you, be your authentic self. Don't try to be what somebody else is making you be. Be a part of the box, you know, but you're going to be a part of the box if you don't discover where you fit at in the whole spectrum of things. And that's going to take some time. It takes time spending time with you, spending time with God, spending time with role models, with mentors.
How do you face yourself when you are in the midst of turmoil? How do you tell the truth to yourself that maybe things that you're doing have hindered you, maybe things that you have experienced and you're not wanting to address them, how they're affecting you and how you move forward in your life? Like, how do you get to a point and face yourself with those things going on?
Again, I think it's just maturity, and it's how bad you want to change. It's how bad you really want more for yourself. Right. I could give you an example. When I was younger, I partied all the time. So my life consisted of partying. When it came to schoolwork, I went to school and I could test out just by sitting in the classroom listening. I would read a book, wasn't paying attention, sometimes head down on the desk. I was really trifling as a teenager. And but the reality is I would take that test and get an A or a B. As I progressed in life and I look back, yes, I graduated, I moved on, you know, I did a couple classes at Harvard Community College, which is a local college here. But the reality was, if I decided that I wanted to party and be situated in a classroom and learn, when I had the gifting and the ability to do more. So I had to own that coming up, that I boxed my own self in. Now, the one thing I will say about God is, when you give your life over to him and you really trust it, he'll open up doors, he'll put you before great, and he'll do all the things that he says when you're faithful to him. But the reality is he still does exceedingly abundantly more than what you could ask to think. It's the power that worketh within you. You got to give him something to work with too. And so I had to own the fact that I blew half my life. You know what I'm saying? I probably, who knows what I would have been. I'm thankful for what I am, but sometimes you think back at those times and you have to own the stupidity of the things that you have done in life. And you have to be able to own it in a way where not just you internalize it, but sometimes you need to share it. Like I needed to share with my kids, look, addiction run in the family. You know, it's all over on this family, it's all over on this side. Girl, I used to tell my kids, I used to smoke weed. I did not realize I was addicted, because you just don't think that until you try to stop. And so I explained to them, I said, these are certain things you can't even pick up, but I had to tell them my truth, you know? And so if you're not willing, sometimes you get to a point, especially in the pastor world, I've seen it sometimes, you know, you get to a point that you're saved and you're situated and you don't want to go back and tell that dirt, but it's the dirt that you went through that's supposed to help somebody else, you know?
Exactly.
And you have to be able to tell that next generation.
Absolutely. Do you think that people know when they're not being honest with themselves?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes the mask and the hurt or the situation is so deep that you've placed mask on it. You've placed sometimes you put it up on a wall on a shelf and you've blocked it in and you no longer even see it. You're living a whole nother something else, and you have not seen the fact that you're not even dealing with the issue. That's the issue that still keeps you, because that's what an issue will do. It will keep you bound. It'll keep you never living your best life. And so sometimes a person knows and they're just so caught up with what people think for whatever reason, or the perception that they need to perceive, the perception that they need people to see of them, that they'll live a lie. But then the other piece is sometimes it's too painful for them to unpack. And that's where you have skilled people who can assist somebody with unpacking a person's truth.
Now, Pastor Carol, you do counseling as well. So when people come to you, is that something that you have them confront, like almost immediately? Are you telling yourself?
Not almost immediately, because again, sometimes a thing is too painful for a person to just automatically bring up. I tell you, for instance, I'm a spiritual counselor, right, not so much a natural counselor, as in LC SW, the licensed social worker. But I will tell you that with those counselors, a lot of times what they'll do with like children, the different ones, they'll take them to a process. They allow them to come through that process as they're ready to unfold it. Because sometimes if you bring it out too soon, it can do more damage than good. However, with a spiritual counselor, it sometimes is a little different. It depends on how they come to me. It depends on what they're saying to me. It depends on what the issue is. Everything has variables. Sometimes a person needs to, look, enough is enough. Let me just tell you, bam, 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 and I've been there. And then other times I'll sit, I'll listen to the person. I'll say, so what is it that you need to do? What is it that you desire to do? All of the above. But sometimes you can't just cut straight to the chase with everybody. You can't just be radical, which is funny because that radicalness is where your generation is. It's like, well, what? Everything is what? And you want the truth in one sense, but are you really ready for the truth in the other sense?
That's big. That freed me, because I really, Pastor Carol, when you talk about like rushing healing, I think a lot of people try to rush it. They think that the finish line is right there and they don't worry about the actual marathon you have to go through to get there. And healing from a lot of that trauma and a lot of that stuff that you held deep inside, it takes a long time. It's different for everybody. So I think you're completely correct in that. And when I think about, like you said, like radical truth telling, what that means to us, it takes a long time. I think sometimes you have to divert off your line multiple times before you find out the narrow path you're supposed to be on. And of course, the path isn't straight. It's curved, it's up and down. But you're going to divert a lot of times. I think sometimes God diverts us off paths because we come off so much better once we get back on the right path.
That's so true. What was you going to say, Amber?
Well, I was going to say, like, how do you, and I want to make sure that I ask this specifically. When someone is beginning that journey and you recognize, they're not ready for the truth quite yet, what process, I know you talked about a process, what's that process that you go through within yourself to counsel this person spiritually?
I need to fix this because for some reason it's you breaking up a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
But let me see the process. Can you hear me good?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear?
So the process is different for everyone. The process is definitely different for everyone. Back to what Dorian was sharing, I think that too, sometimes people do try to rush healing and not understanding that the ups and the downs, the ins and the outs is all a process that we have to go through that do bring us to that expected end. I think when the scriptures talk about, and everybody kind of made it almost cliche because we don't talk about it the way we really need to, when that scripture in Jeremiah 29:11, where he talks about my plan for you is not evil, you know, but it's good to bring about an expected end, which is really that future and that hope. And so when you look at it like that, what it actually does is it brings you to a point of understanding that you're going to have some good, you're going to have some bad, but that there is an expected end in all this. And that's where we need to understand that we do have an expected end and that we will eventually get there. And sometimes the bad seems like it might last for a little minute, and we don't always understand why it lasts that long. So process is different for everyone. I think that the big thing too is being able to have that truth of God's word in your process, because the truth of God's word in your process allows you to see it different. And seeing something different allows it to manifest in your spirit a whole lot differently than if you didn't see it. If I thought that if there was no hope, if I thought that there was a God that is punishing me, if I thought that there was a God that doesn't care about me or love me or see me or is mindful of me, then guess what? Then that makes it seem like I'm just all in this all by myself, and by myself never fully see myself out of it fulfilling anything sometimes, depending on how bad the trauma is. But when you see it in the eyes of God, to be able to realize that you went through this so that prayerfully you don't hide it. You don't just, when the scriptures say you're a royal priesthood, a chosen generation, you're called out. You know, you're that peculiar person that's to show forth praises. So if you're going to praise God for something, that means you're going to tell somebody what he's done. But it says that you would show forth his praises because he has delivered you out of darkness into the marvelous light. What was dark? You don't hear nobody talking about nothing dark. They don't want to tell their dirt. They don't want to tell the darkness. They don't want to tell their heartache, their pain, their disappointment. They don't want to talk about, girl, I was a fool. Man, I let this man do this, and I was this. They ain't telling you their business like that. But the reality is, but God. And if you can never get past your feelings, your emotions, your whatever it is we think that we are, to realize that we are really no longer our own. And every story, every test, every testimony, it can be used to help somebody else.
Absolutely.
That was good.
That was good. Dorian and I have a point here, Aunt Pooh. I call her Aunt Pooh, Dorian. I
know that's right.
That says lying to yourself means you are dishonest with others as well. If you lie to yourself, can you be honest with other people, Aunt Pooh?
So the reality is, let me share that. You know, I tell people that it depends on, again, where you are and the circumstances. But when you think about it, you can teach a concept.
Speak on it.
That's true.
So you can teach that thing inside and out. Like I tell people all day long, I can teach the word, but what people want to see is me living it. Exactly. So it's like, yes, I can maybe tell someone the truth. Mm-hmm. And even with this, I can tell them the truth, but if I'm owning the fact that, but I ain't all the way there yet, then you know what I'm saying? I'm walking in some honesty. But when you are perpetrating, that's different than, telling the truth and then you going back and doing the direct opposite. Behind a closed door or anything. I can speak with my. There's days that me and my husband may not have gotten always along, but then the reality is I still stand on what the Word of God says concerning marriage, concerning how I am to act. Do I always act that way? Absolutely not. You understand? So it's like, but the reality is I have to be honest with that. For me, I still have to teach the truth, even when I'm not always living that truth. And I have to be able to be honest enough to say, no, I wasn't there this time. But guess what? This time last year, I wasn't there, but this time I'm there. Why? Because I own my truth. And God will have you teach the very thing, or have you go through, or have you encounter the very ones areas that you're still in the process in, he'll have you with that individual sharing with them because you're in the process, and he wants to see you unpack it with somebody else. And while you're unpacking it with somebody else, he's just bringing revelation and download to yourself, to you as you're doing it.
That's amazing. And that made me think, Pastor Carol, about how sometimes we're so afraid to share our failures when sometimes we went through a failure not for us to learn, but for others. And, you know, really God uses us as vessels to teach people. And one thing I did, you know, I talked to Amber about too, is like, sometimes I've seen a lot of people who might struggle with their Christian faith. They wonder, how do I live as my authentic self as a Christian or through my faith? When sometimes some churches, as we know, can come off as everybody has to be perfect. So how can you talk to that a little bit, especially how you encourage young people to still live their true lives and make mistakes and learn and things like that, even as Christians?
I think that's the biggest thing for the generation that we have, millennials as well as our youngers, is because as baby boomers and older, the word of God and the way it was taught to us was that you need to toe the line. And in towing that line, I would venture to say, yes, the word of God is clear on what it is that we should do and we should not do. There is no variables really in the word of God. It is pretty direct. However, our worlds are not direct. Our lives are complex. And in that complexity, what God does is he shows, and I think that one of the words that you're using is that grace. Now grace is not an occasion to sin. So let me say that first. But that grace is that understanding that I know that they're not perfect people. I already knew because I'm telling you, I'm talking to an imperfect church, telling them that you sinning, telling them that they fornicating, telling them that you're lying, that your mind ain't right, that this ain't. He's telling the church who they are, and we're reading it, but yet and still we expect people to toe a line that we ourselves are not even really towing, so to speak, or putting the best foot. I think the biggest thing with God is that honesty. It's coming before him when you failed. It's coming before him when you've missed up. When you missed that mark. It's being able to understand that it's those failures. I used to always tell people, don't box my children in to what you think they should be. I said, because the various things that I needed to go through made me profitable for ministry. Would I ever have wanted for my children to sit up and get high, to skip school, to catch rides? I'm telling you, I did some crazy stuff, sell drugs, be on a yacht somewhere. I did some crazy stuff. Would I ever want that for my children? Absolutely not. But what did it allow me to be? It allowed me to be profitable for ministry because I see things in a different eye gate, I think. And it allows me to relate to a people, to a generation that maybe others might not be able to relate to. It's the same thing with being relevant in this hour. That's just like there's certain songs that's out there. If I don't know what my grandbabies is listening to, what the young people at my church is listening to, how can I counter a message that I don't know anything about? And so you have to get to the point where you can open yourself up enough as Christians today to allow people that vulnerability, that transparency, so that they can get the healing that they need. If you're not transparent, ain't nobody coming to you. If every time I talk to you, you telling me, woo, look at that dress. Huh? Yeah, that dress is all the way behind. Girl, you don't need to wear that like that. And look at your hair. You got colors in it this week. And this is what we dealing with. And so my thing is, I have to shift your mindset to have you see the word and see God in a different way. I just water and seed. God is the one that brings about an increase for an individual, whatever it looks like. So I have to be okay with that. And I think that that's one of the big things in our Christendom world, so to speak, right now. We do a lot of judging. We forget that we were sinning. We forget we were shacking. We forget we gave it up when we wasn't supposed to give it up. You know what I'm saying? It was like, what? And the reality is we did it, but if the truth be told and we can be honest about it, we wish that we hadn't. And so we can't even instruct in a good way or a proper way because we're scared to tell our story.
How do we get people to not be scared to tell their story?
It's I think about a perception. It's the way a lot of times we want people to perceive us to be.
Perfect.
Dot, 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 whatever it is today. And
Right.
we're not always okay with sharing where we came from or what we've done. And a lot of times, you know, people will say, well, I moved on from that. That's my past. That may have been what, you know, brought me to the Lord, but that's not what's keeping me with the Lord. But there's purpose in why you went through that. Ask God, God, why is it that you would allow me to experience the things that I've experienced? You think he's infinite in his wisdom. So why is he allowing this if it's not going to be profitable down the road? And that's the way you have to look at it. I tell people you get 3 minutes to have a pity party, you know, because when you really know God and you know his word and you see that you're mindful of the fact that he sees me, you're mindful of the fact that his plan is not evil, you're mindful of the fact that everything works together for the good, that I've been called, that I've been chosen, that, you know, when you put all of these things in motion, it allows you to talk to yourself in a way where I got to get myself together because I know that this is, you know, this is part of my process. Okay, I didn't knock y'all down.
Look, see, they're trying to stop you. They're trying to stop you, Pastor Carol.
The devil.
But Pastor Carol, you said some
right.
very brilliant stuff. And one thing I think about, because I remember growing up and thinking like I couldn't question God. I couldn't question why God was doing certain things in my life or in other people's lives. And one thing I learned through the church and good people was that, you know, you're allowed to ask questions. Like you're allowed to pray to God about exactly what you want and what you want to know. And God will find a way to reveal it. And I think you can trust God and question, you know, why things are happening. And I don't know, like, is that true in what I'm saying, Pastor Carol?
Yeah, oh, definitely. I think that asking God in your prayer times, God, I'm not understanding, you know, and he may or he may not show you. That's the sovereignty of God. But the concept is we have to teach people that they can go to God in relationship. If you're my friend, I should be able to come to you and say to you how I'm feeling. That's being authentic. That's being transparent. That's being real. But what happens is, even in our friendships, we don't know how to be real because we're not taught that. We're taught how to lie at a young age. Mm-hmm. But I'll go back to that in a minute. But what you're saying in regards to really questioning God and asking him and petitioning God, it's nothing wrong with that. But then on the flip end, you have to say, but God, if you don't ever show me, I know this is working for my good. God, I know it doesn't feel good now, but I trust you and I stand on your word. I can't take bits and pieces of a word of his word. I have to take the whole thing. And truth is what God loves. He loves truth. He wants to deal with us in our truth. He wants to deal with us with our heartache, our pain, you know, how we feel, how we think, our frailties, our weaknesses. He wants to deal with us like that, but we have to learn how to come to him. And back to that other issue, we are taught at a young age how to lie, how to hide, how not to portray. And even as men, sometimes you're not even allowed to be able to have a soft moment. You know, if you got a soft moment, they didn't put you on the mourner's bench and calling on Jesus, knowing that you going, you know.
Right.
That's a whole nother topic. Don't even go with it. But what I'm saying is there has to be a softness. There has to be a vulnerability because you're coming to a God who's like your father, who's like your friend, who's like your lover. There has to be an intimacy. And until we can get to that point where we can be intimate with God, we'll always be at that point of kind of standing on that outer skirt. So it's like you've got to get there. And it's hard for people because sometimes you don't know how, you couldn't trust your mother, couldn't trust your father, you know. So when you got dynamics in your life where you can't trust people, you don't even know how to talk to people or where to even start because you didn't have relationship. You didn't see it growing up. That's already a hindrance. So there's different things, you know, you have to just go through the process. And I think it's just not enough people talking about things and helping people get on that right track of really setting a plan, setting, you know, purpose for your life and all of that.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good because it kind of segues into something that Dorian and I were talking about earlier about how you show up as yourself in the world versus how you show up as yourself at home. And you mentioned something very profound where we sometimes don't even know how to be authentic in our friendships because we don't know how to be authentic within ourselves. So I guess my question then becomes, how do you, and we talked about the journey before, but I kind of want to make it very specific for our viewers. Like, if you are in a position where you've become more vulnerable with yourself, you've become more accountable with yourself, and you have also started to observe these things, like, you know what, I feel like I have to laugh when things aren't funny with my friend. You see what I'm saying? They've already started that journey. What do you encourage them to do? Would you encourage them to take inventory of that friend circle? Or is it, you just have different views than your friend circle? What do you
I think with anything, when you're looking at radical truth and you begin with that honesty, you said it in what that radical honesty is. It's a meditation. And I think whenever you're meditating on something, you're spending some time thinking on it. And I think that our self-examination all throughout life is vital. I'm working on a book. God be my helper. I pray to have it out before the end of this year. But it's called Finding Me. And it's intimate moments on the couch with God. And it's a transparent journey that will lead you to you. And in that, that's what I talk about all the time, is that examination. It's like you need to be able to spend time with yourself at least every 6 months. That's an at least. But I would venture to say, if you really want to be successful, you need to look at each month. You need to look at sometimes each week. You need, it just depends on what you said about being out in the world. Some people are destined to make an impact in this world. And others are those supports. But when you are in the forefront and you are destined to have a voice, to have someone look at you a certain way for a truth, you can rest assured that one, the warfare is stupid for you to not tell your truth. That's one. And then the other thing is, it's always that battle with in yourself, where you don't know how much you should share, or should you share it, or should you do this, or should you do that? And so you find yourself beginning to hold back. But I think that when you look at being outside in the world, as a Christian, you definitely have a responsibility, and you have a responsibility to your truth. Everybody, I'm gonna be honest with you, everybody doesn't always know how to take me. I don't know how to be anybody else most of the time but myself. And sometimes that is a difficult piece, because, I'm 55, I'm a first lady, they expect you to, the world expects certain things. But even when I'm out, I've held numerous numerous offices within, like, the Women's Commission, the Youth Commission. I've chaired all these things. I sit on United Way. I've been on numerous boards. And on those boards are people who are way more educated than me. On the board, there's people who have all kinds of different viewpoints and dynamics. And how are you your authentic self in a world where people are used to putting on facades all around you? And what I've found is, when I am my authentic self, you know what it does? It causes other people to be their authentic self. Because that's what people want to be. They want to be who they are. They just want to be who they are. They want to laugh at and be goofy if they're goofy, and not have somebody judge them because they're goofy, or tell them you need to grow up. Well, I just might want to be goofy today. Let me be goofy today. I'm not a goofy person. I'm serious, but I'm just saying that. I'm just using it as an analogy, because I'm probably too serious sometimes. But I do like to have fun. But what I'm saying is, when you're your authentic self, when you can really share your own mess ups, when you can go in and say, oh, girl, please, I'm such and such a man, what, I'm just who I am at that present time. And then not only that, God unctions you sometimes to tell your truth when you don't even want to tell it. Right. So it's like being that vessel of authenticity at all times, so that even when you're not perfect, you're still real. You're still you. You're still telling your truth, because your truth is what people need to see and feel. And I think that for many, I might be this way out here, but then when I get home, I'm this way. Well, no, you want to be who you are at all times, you know, and to be okay with that, to be okay that, no, I'm not perfect. You know, I'm striving just like everybody else. You know, I'm striving to do things. I'm being mindful of my conversation, all of those kind of things. But I think that it just depends, because a lot of people, again, because of hurt, pain, their perception, they want so bad to fit in. They want so bad to have family or community or whatever it is that, you know, they lie and they keep lying.
Pastor Carol, I'm so glad you mentioned about can you be yourself at home, because that's something me and Amber talked about as well. Like, and in the title we talk about grace and space, right? So not just grace, but can you be yourself in your space, and what does that look like? And you know, there's a lot of people who can't even go home, you know, to their family or to whatever home is to them and feel like they're themselves. And I feel like that's not a home then. I feel like your home is where you will always live in your truth. So if the church is supposed to be a home, you know, you should be able to live in your truth in the church. If you're home, you know, you're home with your family, you should be able to live in your truth with your family, you know. And I feel like we gloss over these things because, once again, we're trying to fit in, or we're trying to not be anything outside of the box, because as Black people, we deal with enough, right? Like, we're like, okay, you know, I already got to deal with all this stuff in society. I don't want to have to be a different Black person or something that is outside of what is accepted in our community. So can you speak to a little bit about how you create that how you live as your radical self in your home, whether that's the church or your actual family home, and kind of explore those things, especially across generations?
I think the big thing too is we don't spend enough time listening to all of the generations. That's one. I think that the older generation, a little older than me, and probably my age group, they've come to the realization that this is the way. And you don't listen enough to the creativity and the knowledge that the next generation has. And when you don't create that space for an individual to be free, to be open, to be expressive, that person will bottle themselves up and put themselves on a little shelf, their own self. And I think that sometimes you need to fight for your space, you know, and what that looks like, I think, is having that voice. You know, I know as a married woman, sometimes you have to express yourself in a way as to what you need, as in a married couple, or even in friendships, or even in boss, employee, whatever it is, you have to learn how to say what it is you need, or to be able to say what it is that's bothering you. But you, in order to want to say that, you want to have a safe place to be able to lay it out. And when you don't have that, it makes it difficult to do that. And I think that sometimes you have to fight to be heard. And I think that creating that space at home when you don't have it, that's how you do it, whether it's at church or at home. You have to fight to be heard. God, especially when he puts something in you, it doesn't mean always, well, oh, we're going to do it 2 days from now. It doesn't always mean that. But what it is it's God pushing, it's God nudging. You should be able to feel free to be able to share what you're hearing, and not to have it shut down as, well, you know, you go over there and sit down. You're only 30 years old. You ain't really knowing nothing. You know, when you done lived a little bit longer, you come on over here and talk to me. Not understanding that we have examples all through scripture where he used the young, he used adult, he didn't use who he want, you know. And so that in the scripture realm, but in the world that you're living in, you're going to have to sometimes fight to be heard, especially with society. And so you have to, again, examine yourself. What are your little quirks? I have a thing that I wrote. It's an acronym for it says get real, and it's an acronym. And the very first thing you do, gather yourself. But that second thing, that E, stands for examine. And when you sit back and you examine something, you're just looking at details. You know, you're looking at facts. You need to examine your life, examine your world, examine where you came from. What was your world like birth to 5? What was my world like 6 to 12? You know, figure it all out. you know, you got some time, you know, spend that time. Sometimes it's painful to unpack things like that, but you really need to know you, because you can't be true to yourself if you don't know you, if you haven't experienced you, if you don't know how God has been shaping you, even because he gives us inklings of who we are. There's certain things that you're passionate about that other people aren't. There's certain things that you will find that you enjoy that other people don't. And the reality is, he doesn't always put you with people that enjoy the same things as you. But I do believe that he will direct you that sometimes, no, you need to get with somebody that's like-minded so that you can glean. I believe wholeheartedly in mentors, because when you don't have a mentor, you're haphazardly just kind of going through life trying to figure it all out. But when you have mentors who have been where you've been, or who have been where who are where you want to go, those are the people that you kind of glean from, you pull from. And then there's people who have the gift of wisdom. People who have the gift of wisdom sit at their feet. Pay attention to what they're saying. Look at how they interact with certain things, or how they answer, you know, certain questions. And so, you know, you have to, I think with anything, when you have a space or you want a space, again, sometimes that space is given to you, and sometimes you have to take that space. And then sometimes you have to wait for your space. But either way, I think that we're entitled to a space, and then that ability to be someplace where we feel safe enough to be honest and open and vulnerable.
Yeah,
That's beautiful.
absolutely. Dorian, did you have any follow-up for that point that she just made, that Pastor Carol just made?
I mean, I thought that was amazing. I mean, so it's funny because Pastor Carol, I do like a word for every year, and my word for this year was space. Like, it was super important to me to be in spaces where I felt not just comfortable, but where I felt like I could heal, where I could succeed, and things like that. And I think that looks different for everybody. And sometimes, especially with our generation, we're so go, 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 that we don't take the time to create spaces for healing, to take spaces for recovery, and things like that. So I do wholeheartedly believe that every person should have space, and whatever that means to them, but have space where they can holistically be themselves and just feel appreciated and loved. And it's super important. And I really think you just give me I think you just give a great view of how you can walk in your faith and still be you. And still make mistakes, and still, go through trials and tribulations and share your truth. I just think that is beautiful. And we don't hear that, I think, from enough people in the church or in religious context. Because I am a Christian, and I grew up, Southern Baptist down in North Carolina, went to church every day, youth choir, all that kind of stuff. Like, but one thing about my mother was that my mother was always super passionate about me learning for myself, and me finding out things for myself, similar to what you talked about. And so now I feel like I'm in a better space where I can do that. I can live my life fully. But there's a lot of people who weren't given that grace growing up, and now you see it transferring their lives now. I have friends who have diverted from the church, or friends who just don't feel like they can be wholly represented in themselves. So, it's something that I do hope that more people, especially young people, can listen to people like you who are part of the church and say, hey, we love you, and this is who you are, and you are on your own journey with God, and we're here to accept it.
Right. And can be honest with that next generation, in the sense that, I talk about the elders, and a lot of times the elder women, their husbands had whole intact families. Okay, we're talking about the 80s and up, the 80s and the 70s. Those men sometimes had whole intact families, and the woman was just there holding it down. Never said anything, went to church faithful, loved her husband, had that meal on that table when he came home, all of the different things and the dynamics. But there had to have been, and I've ministered it to elder women all the time. You know how you felt.
Mm-hmm.
You know what you wanted to say.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you've got a whole generation of young girls who let men just come shack up in their house that they on Section 8, risking losing Section 8, risking losing food. You risking getting put out, and your kids getting put out because you got somebody shacked up in your house that's in your house a couple days, and then another couple days they're somewhere else, and you're okay with that. And it's like, who can better minister to you than people who've experienced it? the pain, the heartache, the disappointment that goes along with that. How can you shake a generation to love themselves enough to say no to this or no to that, or I want more for me than what my mother had or what my grandmother had? And it's like, you can't do that if you're not willing to be authentic yourself. And so that authentic truth comes from also a passion for wanting to minister to people, to wanting to love people, to wanting to see people live out their own authentic truth, to see people live out their purpose, and finding your purpose and your destiny and what you're called to be is so important. Rick Warren, when that man, he's a white pastor in somewhere, Saddleback somewhere, that's what he pastored, but he wrote a book, Why on Earth, the purpose-driven church or people or something along those lines. But he makes this one statement and he says, why on earth am I here? And it's the most profound question that most people never, they don't really ask that question, but they don't understand that you are here for something specific. And only the creator of a thing can tell you why you're created. And so you need to go back and spend that time and like I said, self-examine and, go through the motions of some things to see who you are and who God is creating you to be, and, why you allow certain things. Amber alluded to earlier, your friendships. Why is that girl your friend? Why is it that you allow her to be your friend? Why is it that, you allow yourself over and over to be taken advantage of, or go to the restaurant that she wants to go to, or always go to the restaurant that he wants to go to, or I never have a viewpoint as to what wants to be done and I'm okay with that. You're not really okay with that. Or if you are, why are you? That's where self-examination comes in.
That was different. And I think that's the freeing part. That's the freeing part, to realize, no, you do feel some type of way. And if you don't, why don't you feel some type of way? Why you don't feel some type of way? You've been conditioned to deny yourself. You've been conditioned to not, want to express what it is you want and need. So I completely identify with that. And it made me think of a friendship that I had to sever a couple years ago, because I would go out with her and have a good time, but she was the type of person that wanted her friends to be in her shadow. And I knew through that self-examination, that's not the type of friend that I am. I can't live in your shadow. That's not how that works. I'm a person and I've got my own ideas, and I was not okay with that, Pastor Carol. So that was one of those times where I had to be very honest. I know that we formed this friendship, but I have to walk away from it because this friendship is not good for me. So,
But see, you evaluated it, you examined it, you began to see it. Right. And as you began to see it, then you realized you needed a change. Right. And that's where being able to have that freedom to be able to do that, and then to be able to impart that into other people. The show itself is wonderful. The Officially Adulting series here, and this, the conversations, because conversations begin movements, and movements begin change. You can't have change without a conversation. Literally. Excuse me one second.
That's really true. And Amber, I really love that you brought up those experiences, because sometimes I think we're afraid to challenge the places we're in, because we're kind of sometimes scared of the next place we're going to go to. So for you in that instance, we talk about moving on from friend groups or things like that. Sometimes you have to move out of that old, how are you going to get to a new space if you're not moving out of that old place? And sometimes that means leaving people behind. Sometimes it means bringing them back with you. You might be with them down the line, you never know. But until you take that first step, you're never going to figure it out, and you're going to get stuck in the same, the same hole that you've been in. So I think a lot of it is about bravery, trusting God and taking that first step. And a lot of it too is about, I feel like we talk about a lot of things where we talk about how much you value yourself. And I think a lot of that has to go with loneliness. People suffer from feeling lonely, right? And since God is something we technically can't see, all the time, sometimes we're well, am I really alone? And I guess I want to ask both of you, how have you learn to just trust God's presence and feel God even like, you know, when no one else is around or when you're at your lowest points? Like how has God just shown up in your life?
So that's a good piece, because God shows up in different ways depending on what he's developing in you. There's been times that God will move immediately in my life. And I find that when I was a baby Christian, he moved immediately, because he was building my faith, my assurance, my trust that there is a real God. I would feel him in the service so strong. As soon as I'd walk in the door, you know, you would just feel his presence. It was like, oh my God, he's like real. And that's what I would tell people. Sometimes just feel him, just sit and feel him. If you've never felt God, like sometimes after service, you know, people will come up and talk to me and I'll go, you was feeling him today, right? That's always my statement. I go, oh, you was feeling God today. You know, that little ha 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 that I give them, because sometimes, you know, you're hearing about God and all that, but when you feel him, it's like, oh my God, he's like real. And then when you begin to experience him in other ways, it's like he's real, and you can begin to take him at his word. And so in the beginning, God does, he increases our faith, and he begins to show you his attributes and his ways, and he allows you to encounter people that really strongly encourage you. But then there's processes that you have to go through where I feel as though it's that wilderness experience, like Jesus was on the mountain, and the only person talking to him was the devil. God, his father, was not talking to him, but he was on the mountain. He had to go back to what he remembered, okay? And so you got Satan in your ear here, and you better pray you got something in your heart down up in here, because the reality is you're not feeling him, you're not seeing him, you're not, you know, and only what you have in here, only the fact that you've grabbed a hold of some pieces of some word, or you've grabbed a hold to somebody else's testimony, or you grabbed a hold to a past thing that God did, allows you to float through that moment where it didn't seem like he was ever there. And the key is you have to know, I know you're there. But I also know that there's something you're working out in me, and I'm going to trust you with this. The potter, when he's making that, you know, when you think about that potter and that clay is on there, the movement of it, sometimes it's just around and around, it's so smooth, and then other times he's digging in it, you know what I mean? And then other times he'll look at it and he'll say, oh, that ain't right, and he'll bang it back down, you know what I'm saying? So it's just a process to that, to the potter, you know, making us be who, you know, that vessel that he wants us to be. And I think too, we're different types of vessels in different seasons of our life, all leading to that grand purpose of who we have. I mean, of who we are in God.
Wow. Can you say that again, Pastor Carol, about being a different vessel in different seasons? That stuck with me and Amber. Say that one more time.
You know you don't get to get them back. You know, when you're in the flow, you don't always know.
Exactly. That's
I got it recorded, y'all. Okay, we got it.
But the reality is, though, we really are, and I can speak to that because of who I am. It's finding me. I had to find me in every almost season and age group and financial status and children, my children world based on it, you know. So you find yourself in different seasons of life, and who he is to you sometimes is different in that season. But then the other thing is your truth is so different. I mean, what I thought then, I might not think now, you know. And so it's just like you evolve. I think one of the questions that you said when you have past truths, you have people who are all up in, you know, trying to deal with the things of the past when you've evolved from it. And that's the big, it's so funny because that word evolve is like in my spirit. It's been in my spirit for probably like 2 months. And I happened to be on Instagram and I saw Dr. Matthew Stevens put on there something evolve. I was like, okay, God, we all in the same thing. But that word evolve is just in my spirit because sometimes we evolve. And as we're evolving, as we're changing, as we're shifting, things do get left behind. People get left behind. Situations don't seem as big as they may have seemed 20 years ago, or a situation may not seem as small. It may be bigger than what I thought it was, you know. So it's just like you just evolve into a different person as you grow, as you mature, as you allow God to really shape you. But I'm telling you that examination is key, because you're going to find so many things about yourself. And if you can start it early, then you can save yourself. So I think it's like the heart, it's hard not to be you. And so you've got to find you. You know what I mean? You can't do anything until you find yourself, because God has been downloading, or he wants to prepare you for a purpose. But when you're still struggling with your identity in him, and then also as that individual, who am I? You know, what is it that I really like? Why is it that I have this issue or that issue? Or why is it that I think this way? Or where did that perception come from? Is it really a truth, or is it just my truth? Because sometimes a thing is your truth and it's so far from the real truth. Eve in the garden, when we go all the way back, that was a lie. She was told a lie that she believed, and it spiraled all the way to where we are today by her believing something that was shaped in what looked like truth, but it was in reality a lie. And that's what we deal with a lot. We deal with a lot of things that's shaped in truth. And when we're not authentic ourselves and we're not around authentic people, we don't recognize it. And we'll find ourselves attached to people and things and situations that really are not real. And I don't know, the church world is, when I look at the church world, I look at the millennials, I'm sitting here going, my God in heaven, because the shout ain't all the way authentic. The worship, the praise, the getting into the word, everything is rehearsed, or it's a manifestation of flesh, and it's a seducing spirit. You know, it's sensual, it's fleshly, it's a mess. And like, I don't deal with that well. Like, I come in up in there, like, I am kind of, I don't know, I have some tact, but I will go there if I need to go there, you know. And we don't want to have people just be mechanics, you know. Like, I'm watching people carrying a briefcase wanting to pastor, and you ain't even took a year in college. You don't even, what you doing? Go to school. Why are you trying to pastor without going to school, without having, I had one person wanted to, they didn't even have a driver's license. What can you do without a driver's license trying to minister? Now, it's different if you're a child and you're a child minister, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. But as an adult, you want to go as far as you can go. Give God something to work with. Pour into yourself everything that you can get, so that you can open up your mouth and release something into the atmosphere that can change lives.
Wow. You know, Pastor Carol, I'm going to get real. Let's just say that. I was actually interested to hear the rest of that acronym, because I have it here. I was listening
to say that. I want to hear the rest of it.
Down. Gather yourself.
All right, let me find it. Hold on. I pulled it up. I pulled it up. So, okay, so get real. So get real stands for G is gather. And so what you're going to do when you first want to get real with yourself, you got to gather yourself. You want to gather yourself. You want to etch out some time where you can spend with yourself. You want to declutter your world, because you sitting up in a whole bunch of junk and clutter and all that. How you going to hear from God or spend time with yourself in peace when you got a whole bunch of clutter? That's a lesson just within itself. You want to get a good journal. You want to feel like this is going to be an exciting journey, you know, and so you want to kind of gather yourself. The other thing is the examine. I talked about that. This process may take you on an emotional roller coaster. You will, sometimes you remember the good, the bad, the ugly, the painful, all of it. But the main thing is to look and to write, what are you feeling? Remembering, look for patterns, look for cycles, look for things that are possibly familiar to others in your family. Remember your dreams, your goals. Those things that you achieved and the things that you didn't. Are there addictions, financial distress, poverty? What has been your milestones, your successes? If you're older, you take a look at your daily routines, your relationships, naturally and spiritually. So that's what you do when you examine. And then after you examine, you thank him. So that's what that T is, because sometimes we look at a situation and it seems so bad, but it doesn't matter. Whatever state you in, he deserves a hallelujah, a thank you. Why? Because he's providing for you. He's been healing you. You're here. You still have more opportunity. He's been watching over you. And so there's where you thank him. Then real stands for, the next one is reflect. So the R stands for reflect. This is different than examine, because examine is where you're just gathering details and information. Reflecting is where you're deeply thinking and reasoning and asking God to try to figure out, so what was you doing in all this? You will bring forth and you will see the development of an idea, a plan, or a design for your life. As you continue with the help of the Lord, you will begin to see what's truly been going on. And so sometimes we don't understand, well, why did I go through that back then? But as you begin to really reflect, it's something about God. He begins to just minister to you certain things so that when you're looking at it, you see it different. And so this is where you really spend time with God. You get out your journal, you reflect. You want to look at your past, not with a sense of defeat, but with a place of victory. And that's a change in mindset, because when we think that, oh, I was so defeated back here, I went through this. No, you got to look at it from a place of victory, because I'm here and obviously the devil didn't win. And then obviously it's for a purpose that I went through that. And so when you look at it from a place of victory, it changes the whole dynamic of you sitting and wallowing in self-pity. So that's another thing. Discover your purpose, his will for you. All of those things have already been well planned out. And then I also use like some biblical references, like when you look at Joseph, David, Mary, Jesus, Rahab, all of those ones. You too have also been bold enough, real enough to share how they have brought you out of, so that you will be bold enough, real enough to share how you've been brought out of darkness into his marvelous light. And you said it, Dorian, you said it when you talked about that, being courageous and being bold and stepping out, because what that takes, it takes being bold and courageous to be able to step out in faith and to really share your truth and to be your authentic self. The last thing is to embrace where you are, what you've been through, where you are right now. That is difficult because a lot of times we don't want to embrace it. This is all in getting real. You know, you have to embrace where you are so that you can move forward. It's about your destiny, your purpose. It's embracing every experience because it has propelled you to do what only you have been created to do, and you need to embrace it. The last one is abandon. You want to abandon your fear, your doubt, your disappointment, your anger, the mask, the lies, the bitterness, the sin, the defeat, anything that will cause you to miss where God is destined for you to go. And then last, you want to live, laugh, and love abundantly. And so that was getting real. And it brings you to that place of being able to laugh and to love and to realize that that the enemy came to steal, kill, and destroy, but our God came that we would have life and that more abundantly. And that abundant life is not a lie. It's a truth. It's a radical truth. So that's kind of it.
Wow.
When I tell you, when that book comes out, I'm buying it as soon as it's on the market.
Y'all better be praying for me. I'm telling you, I'm trying to birth this thing. It's been woo! I can't even talk about it, the journey. But beautiful. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I really enjoy this.
Wow. Thank you for talking with us this evening and enlightening us. I don't know about you, Dorian, but
I needed it. I needed it. I needed it. It's so good. I mean, it was so freeing, and it was so amazing to hear it come from a spiritual place and just sound like we're talking in the backyard. I mean, it was amazing.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you.
Well, I'm excited. I'm going to be tuning in periodically to see what you guys are talking about.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Doing a great thing.
Oh, no, thank you so much
for talking to us, Pastor.
Thank you.
And for teaching us how to get real tonight.
Mm-hmm.
We appreciate you.
Trying. It's a process. We stay in that journey.
Yes, it's a process. And that's what we just want to get across tonight. It's a process. Everything is a process.